Hey guys, this is Mr. Denson along with Mr. Martin. We are back for lesson number 3 today. We thought we'd do something a little different and try to give a visual here of us, and also along with us you can see the ICANN and you will see some of the information behind us and so forth. So what we wanted to do today is get started by briefly talking about our ICANN today. What's the purpose of today's lesson? Today we're going to focus on the bottom ICANN, which is describing the early societies that existed in Meso and South America. This is a continuation of the first 2 lessons, as we have spoken about the earliest Americans, the Paleo-Indians, and we've also spoken about the Olmec and the Mayan civilizations. Mr. Martin will be with us just in a minute to give a visual representation of some of the models that we can expect to complete at some point this year, either virtually or hopefully in person. So he'll be giving an overview of those. Real quick though, I wanted to just briefly talk about some of the vocabulary that we had discussed in our first lesson. Some important key terms that went along with our first lesson was migration, the movement of people or animals from one region to the other. And that's how the earliest Americans, the Paleo-Indians, as they crossed the Bering Land Bridge, they migrated from one place to the other. Now, it didn't all stop in North America as they migrated down through Mesoamerica, and some even settled in South America. And you see descendants of some of those civilizations, a couple that we'll talk about today, that are still present in those regions today. Another key term we talked about was environments. These are cultures and landscapes that surround your living things. So that's part of your environment, what surrounds you. And of course, culture was a big one. That was one of our assessments, was focused on culture. And it's a group set of common values and traditions. That is culture. We might have a few technical difficulties as we progress through here, but we'll do the best we can. Okay, Mr. Martin is going to step in here in just a second. He's going to go over a few of the models of some of the projects that go along with these societies that we're going to be talking about. Mr. Martin.
All right, guys, so welcome to Lesson 3 today. As Mr. Denson said, we talked about Paleo-Indians last time. We learned that they came to the New World first. They came across something called the Bering Land Bridge. They were a hunter-gatherer people, so that means that they had to follow their food source. So the main food was the mammoth, and so we learned that they followed over, and then wherever that mammoth went or other animals, that's where they went. Now, they're different than what we're talking about today in terms of society. The difference is they had to move around, and once you became a civilization or a society, you could settle down in one area. And to be able to do that, you need agriculture. So the first group that was able to do that is a group called the Olmec. And I like in history to kind of associate things with groups of people to keep it in my mind. So I think, what were the Olmec known for? Now, they did build temples, and their temples were small. They built pyramids. They had a lot of stone structures. But the thing that's most famous for them are the big heads that they built. And so we can see those today in the Smithsonian. All right, so looking back at our projects, I found a model from the past. Here is one of our Olmec heads that a student named Macy White created. I think she did a really good job showing a smaller version of what is now at the Smithsonian. So when I think of those Olmec, I think of the mysteries behind them. Where do they come from? A lot of people have theories on that, and we also discussed that in the last lesson. But that really shows their society when you look back, with the difference between the Maya and the Aztec. Looking at the Aztec, I think of several things. And one of the things that really came out in our culture recently was the Mayan calendar, because this calendar came to an end. And they were sophisticated enough, they were advanced enough to create a calendar that was almost right to ours today. They had 366 days of the year. They didn't account for leap year, so it was a little bit different. But this was done by a student named Aubrey McIntosh, and she did a really good job representing those calendars that we found. Here is a depiction of one of their gods. This was done by Presley Applegate last year, and so she did a nice painting of the sun god. And then we have, of course, the Mayan temples, or the pyramids. And the pyramids were really big. This is made out of solid wood. So he cut all these different boards and layered them on top. But up top here is where they had the religious ceremonies. So they went up there to sacrifice people. And with that, that's a tough part of looking back at that society, that they had something that barbaric that they performed, but that's what they believed in. They were polytheistic. So again, they believed that they needed to sacrifice in case they had a drought, in case they wanted to please their gods. So that was something that was in daily life for them.
So guys, for today's lesson, we are going to expand on the first two lessons. Thank you, Mr. Martin, for showing us those projects and giving us what to expect, or showing the students what to expect as we explore the different cultures this year. Now today we're going to talk about the Aztecs and the Incas. Now we're going to give a brief overview of these two societies, and Meso and Central America, or South America rather, because we will come back to these two societies as we talk about the introduction of the Spanish and the consequences and of that introduction in chapter 3. So we'll talk about Pizarro, we'll talk about Cortez, we'll talk about the conquest of the empires, and like I said, the results of that. Okay, so for today, briefly talking about the Aztec Empire. They conquered central Mexico. They migrated down from the North American area down to Mesoamerica and or Central America. And present-day Mexico. So if you're trying to make that geographical connection, think of Mexico, south of the U.S. That's the area we're talking about. And also, I'll show a visual here in just a minute that shows you just how expansive that their society was. A very large society for that time period. So they founded the capital city, and it was Tenochtitlan. In around 1325, it became one of the greatest cities in the world, or the Americas, and one of the world's largest cities overall. So a very expansive city. And just a quick note on that city, it was built in the middle of a lake. And you think, built a city in the middle of a lake, why in the world would you do that? Well, it has several purposes, and one of those being a protective barrier. Think of the Middle Ages and moats around castles, but it does provide problems and issues with transportation and trade. Well, how do you overcome that? You build roads, build raised roads that go through the lake. And of course that helps with transportation, exchange of goods and services, and so forth. But it's interesting. They built their city, a huge, massive city in the middle of a lake. By the early 1500s, they ruled and were the most powerful state in Mesoamerica. Now, this is around the time of the Spanish invasion into their lands. And like I said, we will expand more into that subject in chapter 3. Now, the Incas. They began as a small tribe in the Andes Mountains. And you said, well, where's the Andes Mountains? Well, it's on the coast in South America, present-day South America. Their capital city was Cusco. By the 1500s, once again, once the Spanish would arrive, their empire stretched along much of the western South American coast. Okay? Known for terrace agriculture and having a very strong central government. Mr. Martin will come back in just a few minutes to talk more about terrace agriculture, but it's very important to their existence and survival, was being able to farm on the side of a hill. How do you do that? What does that look like? Mr. Martin will be able to show you that here in just a few minutes. Okay, the Aztecs and the Incas, the focus of today's lesson. Next slide, please. Now, I alluded to this earlier, but you see the vast empire that the Aztecs had control possession of. Present-day Mexico, the peninsula there that connects both North and South America. Vast empire. One of the problems with having a vast empire is that you create a lot of enemies. Well, how were they able to, I might have skipped over that earlier, but they were able to conquer and have a vast empire due to the size and strength of the military. As is the case today. If you want to make a modern connection, make it with the United States of America. We have one of the strongest, best, well-equipped militaries the world's ever seen. What has that allowed us to do? It's allowed us to have many conquests throughout the world. It's allowed us to unite the world, but we also have a lot of enemies just like the Aztecs did. So there's always a positive and a negative in there. Next slide, please, sir. So this is a picture. It captures part of the Aztec civilization that was alluded to earlier as well. It has to do with sacrifice. Sacrifice is a mainstay of the Aztec civilization, which was the case not only with the Aztecs, they're just more known for being a warlike, a warring culture, having a powerful, strong military, and with that comes the worship of many gods. One of these being the sun god. And this picture shows crowds gathered beneath the temple, and many, many executions, or sacrifices, you would say, took place. Many thousands of sacrifices throughout the year, as a matter of fact. Okay.
All right, so now we're moving further south. We have left Mesoamerica and we've moved down to South America. We're going to talk about the Incan Empire. The Incan Empire was located on the Pacific Ocean. They were up in the Andes Mountains today in the country of Chile. And they lived up in those mountains and they had a lot of obstacles to overcome. Number one, it was good that they lived up there in terms of protection, but they had to figure out how are they going to do agriculture. And this is a practice today that they developed that we still use. And you may have heard the term terrace gardening or terracing. And that's something that they became masters at. So you may look at this slide and think, why would they take all the trouble to build these walls up and make flat land? So I want you to take maybe a couple seconds and really think about, why would you do that? Why would you have to dig into this mountain, flatten that land, and then plant your crops? Okay, so hopefully what popped in your head really quick is erosion. When it rains, if you plant those crops directly onto the mountain, the water is going to come down the mountain, it's going to wash your crops down. So what they would have to do, again, build up, put some rock in there, flatten it out, plant their crops, and this is, again, something the entire world still uses today. I have one model from the Inca, and I'll show you really quick. This was many years ago by a girl named Laura Collett, and she showed really good. She went out and got some gravel out of her driveway. She built up her walls, and she shows those crops. So as you see these projects and as we talk about them, be thinking, because at the end of this unit, we're going to assign a society project. And as you see these, get some ideas. What can I do? Notice some of these projects are going to be built out of cardboard, out of things around their house, but they're all really good models that I'm showing. Here is an example of one of their cities built up into the Andes Mountains. Now notice, they've got their agriculture down here. They've got their houses. They've got protection because they have mountains all around. They have they have a water source right down the mountain. So they had entire cities and civilization built up into these mountains. Okay. These are, if you notice, we have a couple like little video. We're going to put those into the classroom instead of trying to show them on here. We're going to assign them, and then we'll put maybe a question or two on. But we'll move on to our, okay. So our final thing that we're going to present you today is going to be the assignment that's going to be due Friday. And that is going to be something called an illustrated timeline. Now, an illustrated timeline is different than just creating a normal timeline. You will pick 5 civilizations. The first is not a civilization, it's a group of people, but the Paleo-Indians that we've talked about. Then you're going to talk about the Olmec, the Maya, the Aztec, and the Inca. And what we want is, this is a good example, but we want the information. We want some type of picture that shows you those people. And then we want the dates on there. So we want it colored, we want it on a piece of paper, and once you're done, you're going to take a picture of it, and you're going to attach it to the assignment that's going to be in Google Classroom. Okay, well, I hope everybody enjoyed the lesson today. Again, we'll post those videos on the Google Classroom. There'll be a 4th lesson coming this week, and that's when we're going to move to North American Native Americans. We're going to talk about things like totems and teepees and all those things that are associated with those Native Americans. All right, you guys take care.